Hey, hope you're well. Welcome back. I want to talk today about which cloud is the best to learn for a DevOps engineer out of the big three: AWS, Azure, or GCP. And by the way, stick to one cloud. You don't want to do multi-cloud and keep switching every job the cloud that you use. I've done it, and it was super interesting and personally valuable. But employers don't give a I don't want to swear, but they don't give a shit, honestly. They only look at the last cloud that you used, and it better be a match for the one that they're using. So stick to one cloud. Trust me when I say that. Now, let me talk about those clouds. AWS was the first mover. It was super popular with a lot of the early cloud projects, both on especially enterprise, but also startup and scale up. And they got a huge community out there. Azure is a bit different. They're pretty much at the same level now, and maybe Azure will lead in the future. But they were behind for a while. But of course, many companies have already for decades had Microsoft agreements on operating system and software, and it's been quite easy for Microsoft to just say, hey, use those for a cloud as well. So Azure has pretty much caught up, and they're both quite different, obviously. To use them, they're a little bit different styles. I like AWS and I like Azure. Some people hate Azure. It's got this kind of bladed UI that they just don't like, but honestly I think it's perfectly fine. Azure is really good. If it were down to me today, although I'm committed to AWS, if I had to start again, honestly I'd probably pick Azure because I think it's going to be the biggest one going forward. I think it's going to beat AWS, quite honestly, but AWS will never die away. It will always be quite big. They're established their position. GCP obviously is a bit smaller, and I don't know why. I do wonder sometimes why didn't Google catch up just the way Microsoft did? Couldn't they have found a way? They're obviously a smart company, but I think they just decided we're just not going to invest that much in our cloud offering. There was speculation for a while they would sell that cloud to another company. I don't know, Oracle or some other big company, but it never happened, and it looks like it's not going to happen now. So what GCP do though is they do specialize in a few areas. So whilst AWS and Azure are pretty similar in most respects, Google has some special offerings like AI ML, because they used it internally. It's pretty damn good. Also, another notable one is their Kubernetes, so GKE, Google Kubernetes Engine. It's widely seen as the best managed cloud Kubernetes service, so just something to bear in mind. But I would not recommend someone pursue a career only on Google Cloud unless they're living in a major metro area, because otherwise there just won't be simply the amount of jobs that you need to have a successful career where you're moving every 2 or 3 years. You're going to struggle to find new jobs. If you're living near a smaller city, then don't even do Google. Honestly, it's going to be almost impossible for you to change jobs. That's my honest advice. So back to AWS and Azure. There are nevertheless some key differences, and one of the key differences from a DevOps perspective is the application stack. So if you're a company and you are developing software and you're doing DevOps and you have DevOps engineers, then if your stack is .NET, for example C#, and if your app stack is like 90% .NET applications or 100%, and then Azure is a natural fit. Many of the products and services will naturally fit your application stack. If it isn't like that, if it's mixed, you can't really go wrong with either AWS or Azure. But if you do have that .NET bias, I would say they should go to Azure. Now, what about you as an engineer? Do you have a bias towards a particular stack? I'll take my example. I really came from a Windows sysadmin background and then changed to cloud and DevOps, and I just really embraced Linux. I don't want to ever go back to the Windows days, so that's one reason that I prefer to stick with AWS. I don't want anything to do with Windows whatsoever. I got nothing against Microsoft, but I don't want anything to do with Windows and the internals and registries and the registry and IIS and all that stuff. And I also used to work, when I was more sysadmin days, I worked in, let's call it core IT or corporate IT, especially for companies that don't really do much development, they have no DevOps, then you're looking after things like Exchange and Active Directory and Microsoft SQL Server, other things like corporate VPN, all that kind of stuff. That gives me nightmares. I have no desire to go anywhere near that. Now, if you're a DevOps engineer looking after a .NET application stack, then and you're on Azure, doesn't mean you have to touch all that nightmare stuff, or what I regard as nightmare stuff. But you might actually find yourself doing that, So for me, I want nothing to do with the Windows stack. I did it for many years and completely done with it. That's another reason I chose AWS. AWS, by the way, has a huge community. It's a bit different now. We have AI, but back in the day, if you needed to debug an error and you search Stack Overflow, if it was AWS, no problem. If it was Google Cloud, yeah, not that much really. If it was Azure, it was like forget it. There was almost nothing at one point. Times have changed, and we also, by the way, have AI, so those things are really less of an issue. But there was still, I would say that the biggest community is AWS. So look, let's go back to the original question: which cloud is the best to learn? All three are equal if you're in a major metro area. If you're not in a major metro area, drop GCP, and then you have to decide between AWS and Azure. And really, you can't go wrong with both. You just cannot go wrong with either of them. Flip a coin and pick one, or simply try out the interface, build a few things in either of them, see if you have a preference for one over the other. If you have a preference, you might as well follow that passion and stick with that cloud. That's what I have to say. So look, I hope this video was useful for you, and please, if you did find it like that, give it a like, subscribe to the channel for more. I'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye bye.